Here's what I like about Remembrance Day. It doesn't really matter your age or your background or political leanings or even really the state of the world. On November 11th at 11 o'clock, it's almost unanimously agreed that it is worthwhile to lower our heads, shut our mouths, and pay our respects. So as long as we're saluting our veterans, I want to take an extra minute and shine a little extra light on a very specific section of this impressive group, and that is the Indigenous veterans, because for me, their sacrifice has a unique nobility to it. To start, if you were Indigenous living in this country during World War I and World War II, for example, it wasn't like Canada was a shining beacon of liberty and freedom for you. I mean, your government just spent decades aggressively trying to stamp out you and your culture, and we're pretty successful at it. And there wasn't really any sign of slowing. I mean, the 60s scoop hadn't even happened yet. But despite all of that, you find the strength to rise above it and enlist anyway. And you don't just enlist, by the way, you bring the thunder. Listen to this list of skills you brought to the field. Code breakers, nurses, engineers, mechanics, system specialists, cartographers, and some of the best, most legendary and proficient snipers to ever take the field. Guys. Now, in recent history, Canada has gotten, a little better at boasting about its impressive accomplishments in both the big world wars. So it's worth noting that in the Canadian Armed Forces, there was no group, pound for pound, better represented than Indigenous peoples. They were there, man. Passchendaele, Vimy Ridge, they were there, man. Front lines, brother. So you would think the ones that survived this impressive victory and came back home, they would get a hero's welcome, right? Not exactly. Many Indigenous veterans found that when they came back home, they didn't have access to the very freedoms that you or I or anyone at the time had. The freedoms they just risked their lives for. Things like access to support from Veterans Affairs, buying and selling land, working or living anywhere that you wanted to, voting in elections. Yeah, that stuff wasn't necessarily accessible to Indigenous veterans. Even walking in the front door of a Royal Canadian Legion was illegal for a time. That's right, if you walked into a Legion and you just happened to be an Indigenous person that was also a veteran, you could be fined or arrested. Oh, it gets worse. The bar owners could even get fined. That means that racism wasn't just legal, it was kind of encouraged. Now, I'm not a Canadian veteran, but I think I have a pretty good handle on the importance of the camaraderie of being connected to a community that knows exactly what you've been through and what you're thinking because they have been through it as well. My father-in-law actually served as a military mechanic for most of his life. Now, he passed away just over a year ago, and he didn't ask for much. No big flashy funeral or service, no flowers. All he asked was for people to make a donation to his home branch, 23 Royal Canadian Legion, Mattawa, Ontario. That's all he asked for. See? It matters to these guys. So our government was perfectly comfortable with Indigenous and not Indigenous soldiers fighting together in the same fields, taking the same oath, wearing the same uniform, getting shot at by the same enemy, having the same end goal, suffering the same PTSD. As long as when all of this is over, y'all don't get together and play darts in the same room, okay? All right, bottom line here, our Indigenous veterans deserved better respect than they received. So, let's make up the difference, huh? So as long as we're lowering our heads on November 8th and November 11th, I'm also asking you to fill your heads, at least with these three names. I'm going to drop them on you right now. Tommy Prince, Mary Grey Eyes, Francis Pegamagabo. Look them up, honor their legacy, tip your cap, lest we forget. The things I wish I'd known.